This is Crashed Me Twice, and today I'm going to share with you the monster in the Simpit, which is this. It is my PC, my sim rig. I'm using it also for other tasks like virtual machines and, my editing, photo editing, video editing. It's an all-around machine which does everything and everything just great. So I decided to build a frame. This frame is built from 1/2-inch steel tubing. It took me several weeks to build it. Then I added all the components I wanted. I water cooled it and added all the electronics inside and out to make it my own. The board consists of a Supermicro X10QBI, which is a 4-socket CPU. Right here, 1, 2, 3, 4 CPUs. Each one of these CPUs is a LGA 2011 version 3. Each of those CPUs has 10 physical cores, 20 logical cores. They all have water cooling on them. I made those brackets because that's a narrow ILM. So I had to make brackets for my SwiftTech Apogee HD blocks. I had them before, 2 of those. The center ones I had before in another machine. And then I was lucky enough to get some limited edition gold-plated ones, which are on the outside. These blocks are fantastic for cooling. They get the temperatures really low on the CPUs, so I thought I want to use them. But of course, narrow ILM brackets for 2011 are non-existent from SwiftTech or any other manufacturer who fit, so I had to make those. On the board are installed 8 memory cards. Each have space for 12 modules. Currently, the system is configured with 256 gigabytes of memory. Over here I have the Optane drive, which is my boot drive. In between those cards are also PCI Express slots. They were originally not available if you install all 8 cards because you can run that system with 4 cards. So I had to make special heat sinks for the front to put PCI Express X4 adapters in them. I purchased adapters which were the lowest I could find. So in between sitting 3 NVMe drives. They are all rated for my data and for my game drive or DCS drive. In here sits EVGA for the Win 3090. It was really, I paid a lot of money for it at the time because they weren't really available. That was when what happened. I made a special adapter for it, for the power, and I also had to make a cutout or extend the bracket here, which holds the memory cards down. Over here is a AlphaCool block. This is a Barrow block. These Barrow blocks are fantastic. I have no complaints about them. I used to buy expensive ones from EK and AlphaCool, or, I could not tell any difference. Maybe 1 degree, maybe 2 at the best. I have no problems cooling this card. On the back I have an AlphaCool block, which cools the back of that EVGA card because the EVGA 3090 has the memory modules on the back of the PCB and they get pretty warm. So instead of running a fan onto it, I purchased a water block from AlphaCool, which was the cheapest I could find. Bike ski was out and I added this one to it. And then I had to fix something on this block because they leak when you buy them. They have 2 little ports on the back. If you don't use those connectors, they will leak out. So I installed stainless steel bolts with a O-ring and that took care of it. I also used smaller tubing for the back block instead of from the big block. So because this one has a lot high flow rate. This block has from Barrow has a little bit less of a high flow rate because there's a fin stack where a GPU processor is. To equalize the flow on the card from the front block and the rear block, I installed smaller tubing to flow through the smaller and larger tubing to flow through the main block. Here I made from an old server I had. It's a Dell server. I don't know the model number right now. I will put it on the website. I made a cut to the original assembly, rewelded everything, put everything back together, and made mounting points on it. So now these fans can blow right where the VRM is in front of those CPU blocks. Okay, here we have a reservoir which are made from acetal or palm. I have a 1/2 inch thick Lexan plate against it. It's recessed and sealed with an O-ring. And then on top, I made a frame from 1/8 inch thick aluminum. So this aluminum does not come in contact with the water. Over here, I have a pressure sensor. It will open and close a small valve in the back, which then equalizes the pressure. This instrument goes above and below zero. I have it because in a system like this with my heavy pumps, I have under pressure. So it makes the pumps work harder. This one will equalize the pressure if it reaches a certain amount. And it equalizes through this little tubing here out to the environment. Down here on the panel, I have 3 LED lights. Green for full, orange for fill, and red for warning. It's too low of liquid in the reservoir. On the reservoir itself are 3 sensors installed, and these sensors tell how much of liquid or water is in them. This one here is a manual override for this digital system, so that I can at any time release the pressure. That's very helpful once you have to make a liquid change. In here, this will adjust the lighting inside the reservoir, which is also installed, and I can turn the lighting on temporary here or off. I'm using this mainly when I fill it, the reservoir, so I see where the level is, or when I double check, when one of the light comes on, I want to double check, I hold that button down, the reservoir lights up, depending how bright I have adjusted it with this knob. Over here we have 1, 2, and then there's one on the bottom, tech units or Peltier or thermoelectric cooling units. These are cooled units. I used to have one and I liked it so much I bought another one, and then I found a third one on eBay. I bought them all. I replaced all of the blocks they came with, which was a long time ago, and at that time they still made the blocks out of aluminum, so I made copper blocks for it. In between sandwiched is the Peltier plate, and that goes onto that heatsink, and these down there are powerful Dell fans from Foxconn, 120mm, would cool that heatsink. Over here I made special plates, I 3D printed a holder for them, and these electronic boards are PWM controllers, which control the fan down there depending on the heatsink's temperature. Over here, that's called a Proteus flow switch. The Proteus flow switch switches a LED on or off if the flow goes slower or higher. So if the flow goes below a set amount, that LED will come on and light up red. So I know I have not enough flow. The lower LED will show me what the pumps are doing. If the pumps are working, both of them, or 3 or 4, whatever I've installed, this LED will light up and says, okay, we got a signal from the pump, everything is okay. It also has an alarm built in, so when the flow rate goes too low, it starts beeping, and this button here allows me to pause the beeper for 1 minute, because otherwise it drives you insane. Alright, and that's pretty much the tech unit here. Oh yeah, and these here are Alpha Computer filters. Each of the tech has a filter on it, which filters the liquid so that there's no dirt or debris going through the system. Also, it helps with those blocks because they're hard to clean, because you cannot open those blocks. They're all one piece copper and then fused together. This is a temperature comparison module, and it compares the 2 sensors attached here. One sensor is in line with the water, and the other one, room temperature, ambient, down here. The techs turn on when the system is 7 degrees Celsius above room temperature. The techs turn off when the liquid in there is 5 degrees below temperature of the room. Why I did this is so I experienced the techs, they are so powerful, they cool the system down to a level where I develop moisture. I don't want to have moisture on the board or on the blocks. I had to find a solution for this, and this was it. This here is a simple temperature sensor which turns this fan row on or off, and also regulate the speed of the fans depending on temperature. So higher the temperature, so faster the fan run, so lower the temperature, so less the fan run or switch off. In here, I have a small little sensor right there by the VRM. So if the VRM not cool enough, these fans will cool it. That's all these fans do. Module here is a relay module which powers the pump. There's 2 right now for 2 pumps. I can install a 4 relay module if I should decide to install more pumps, which I do not need. This panel is the pump control. Right now you see I have 2 switches installed. These 2 switches control each of the pumps I have installed. Those pumps are running right now on about 22 volts, sometimes 21 volts, depending on how I set it. So I regulate the pumps to a voltage which doesn't produce high-pitched whine these pumps producing when they are set to 24 volts. I recognize that as soon as you go around or below 22 volts, the whine is gone. So that's why this panel is here. Here's a switch which switches the pumps on, all of them, off, or external. External, I have made here a socket so I can feed those pumps externally by just plugging in a power supply with that plug here, and then I can fill the system and control the pumps with this switch by switching them off or on to external. Once the system is all good and it's powered, then I switch it over to constant on. This makes liquid changes very simple and easy. Over here, this panel is power and reset. It has 3 LEDs up here for power on. The next one is the storage or hard drive LED. And then I have a fail LED, which when the system overheats or I have a problem with the system, this LED will come on. I mean, electronic for that. Over here, I have a row of LEDs, which are activity LEDs for SAS drive. I have a SAS drive, and these SAS drives, when they spool up doing something, then these lights will activate accordingly. Over here, I have the power panel, tells me the voltage. Currently I'm running 122. It shows me the amperage, the power usage. As you can see, just by standby, this board takes about 15 watts. When I fully power up and have the 3090 running on high, I reach an excess of about 1200 watts. Okay, so that was the top of the system. Let's take a look on the inside, which is very cool. You can just lift that whole tray up like that. Okay, here we have the 2 pumps. These are coolant pumps. Here is a relay module in the corner down there, which controls the PWM for those pumps. How this works is, if I switch off one of those buttons, if I switch 1 or 2 pumps off, the system will give me a warning for the simple reason because it thinks the pumps are failing. So this doesn't help much. So I had to make a module which bridges this RPM signal to a RPM generator. The RPM generator produces a fake pump signal, RPM wise, and through that little board here, I can bridge that connection so that the system thinks, hey, everything is okay. So if I switch one of the pumps off, or both of them, manually here on this control panel, everything will be fine. If the pumps are on and the pump should fail, I still get the warning because I do not switch the pumps off on those 2 switches. And this is kind of how this works. This big buck controller here is a step-up control. I'm going to feed it from the system 12 volts, and out comes a voltage I can set here, currently 22 volts, for the pumps. This way I can run 24 volt pumps on a 12 volt system and have the correct voltage. I don't know if you can see it, but in the back I have a separate power supply. It's a server power supply, which I modified a little bit to be quiet with top-mounted fans. Again, with a PWM controller. This system here, so this server power supply, is only there for the tech, because the techs take a lot of wattage, and I didn't want to take it off the main system power supply, which is that EVGA 1600 watt here. So these have a separate power source. And that's pretty much it. If you want to look underneath here, you can see the cables, how I routed them. Alright, and that is the cable which comes from the power supply to the system, which we look at it next. Down here is the motherboard ATX connector, just the standard ATX, just like you find on any other power supply and motherboard. Okay, here is 2 powers for the CPUs. These are your standard 8-pin CPU power connector. However, this board has 4 CPUs, so we need an additional 4 power connectors. Well, a normal ATX board doesn't give you that, obviously. However, that EVGA power supply has 6 outputs for graphics cards. So I converted these outputs from GPU power to CPU power. out of GPU power connectors, CPU connectors. Oh. Okay, over here, power supply. This is the EVGA 1600 watt with all the connections. Here we have a power inlet, which is a 25 amp shielded inlet. Over here I have an industrial power switch, which powers the board on or off, and this LED will tell me if it's on. You can also see that I've also installed in that frame a server rail or rack rail, which allows me to install 1U, 2U or bigger panels and use them as the bottom of my case so I can mount stuff on it. I take those bolts out on both sides, and then I can easily pull it out and service anything. Up here, this little contraption here contains a mini ITX board. That's also a Supermicro with an embedded Xeon processor, has 64 GB of DDR4 memory, an NVMe. In here is the boot drive and a P620 Quadro card, NVIDIA Quadro card, which feeds my monitors. Actually just one monitor because it's connected to a KVM. Here I made kind of the same thing out of another server fan array, a 3-fan edition, which will cool the motherboard, the NVMe, and everything else there. I also reversed the fan in the EVGA power supply. Instead of blowing inwards, it draws air and blows out, because on the end of this board is a 10 GB Ethernet connection, and that heatsink got so hot and was unable to cool it because there was so much in between those, between the heatsink and the fans. I had a hard time cooling it, so I reversed the fan, and ever since everything works fine. That's a 550 watt SFX power supply, so it's made for mini ITX boards or for very small form factor cases. It's more than enough power to feed that board. That board uses about 60 to 80 watts on power. On the side, again, I'm using a PWM controller for those fans. In this case, I do not have a temperature controlled array. I just set it manually to a reasonable good speed to get good cooling, because there's really not a lot of fluctuations, because I do not run the system up to the brim. If I just want to look at a website quick while the main system is down or maintenance, I can do that on that little mini ITX just fine. As you can see in the front of this frame, I also have rack rails in them, and I mounted in two 1U plates. It's a cooling plate, 1U cooling plate. I added another flat plate to it, which on the inside has some controllers on it. This plate here I made from, I believe, the Kingwin hard drive cages. Right? They're normally going into a 525 slot on your PC, and you can just stick a hard drive into them. I made here switches to control fans which are inside, because they normally do not come with fans and don't have a cutout for fans. So I made a round cutout. I put one of those very tiny flat heatsink fans on each of them, and they can be turned on or off. I don't need them if I have just an SSD in there, because they don't get hot, but if I put a standard hard drive in there, then I do cool them with the fans. This is the main power for each bay, and this allows me to copy from one hard drive to another, or from an SSD to another, or just put a quick SSD in there from filming, because I'm filming normally with the Atomus, which is a recorder. It records to a SATA SSD, so I can just take it out, stick it in there, and I'm good to go. Here, self-explanatory pretty much. Two USB 3, two USB 2 ports, which are connected to the motherboard, and that's that. Okay, here we are on the back side of the monster, and we have two radiators. Each one has 340 millimeter fans. These radiators are from watercooled. They have a high flow through rate. I have 6 Nocta fans on those radiators. They're the industrial 3000 RPM ones, but also controlled via PWM controllers. This here is the TAC scan. It is a unit which allows me to monitor my pumps. And this one has a chip built in to generate an RPM signal. And that's what I'm using here to bridge that with the relay controller I just showed you earlier. Over here I made a small little electronic for it. This board does provide output for an alarm, so I made an alarm system here which beeps very loud, because this is actually a beeper from a truck. You know, when you hear those trucks backing up, that beep beep, this is the beeper. Here's a little switch. It's a temporary switch right now until I have this all solved via electronics. This way I can switch that beeper manually off. So this thing starts beeping because the pump fails or I don't have enough flow. The pump will shut off. I'm running a RPM signal controller, meaning that if the pumps run higher than set, so I'm putting a certain voltage on this pump, say 22 volts. The pump's stay at 4,000 RPM. If those pumps go over 4,500 RPM, there will be an alarm, because then I know there's no liquid, because there's no resistance, so the pumps spin up. To prevent the pump burnout, I have the pump shut off automatically, have the beeper go on, the system shut down. And all this is controlled via this panel plus a small electronic panel on the inside. Over here I have just a standard drain valve, and I had those from the modding world, those drain valves, those fancy ones, and they're just a pain to operate. I did a lot of draining and filling by testing the system and so on, so I decided I'm just going to go over to my Ace store, buy me a standard valve and cut new threads in it, and that's what I did. And this is just a $5 valve and no problems at all. Over here we have those little PWM controllers, and these both controllers control each row of the fans. There's only space for 3 fans on one of those controllers. They're all controlled via one header, but the RPM signal is fed to all 3 headers of each fan. The PWM is all the same for all fans on the top row, and all the same for the fans on the bottom row. This way you don't have one fan running faster and one slower. They all run at the same speed. They're all adjustable with one little resistor, and this thing is just awesome. I also integrated in the frame some hooks to run my cables through. This prevents the cables from going too warm being behind the radiators, because they put out some good heat. Up here you can see a straight copper tubing, 1/2-inch ID. It's not a pipe, because pipe are measured different, and I plumb everything with that tubing, inside, up here, wherever I can. Sometimes it's unavoidable to have to use tubing. I also have here one little tubing installed, which is a clear tubing. That's the only clear tubing in the system, and this clear tubing tells me if I have some flow here when I fill the system up. I want to see that there's no more bubbles in there. It's hard sometimes to see in the block, because the blocks always take a little bit of a time to fill up. So I usually fill the system, run it for 24 hours, and all the blocks are bubble free and don't have any air in them. And while we're here, you can also maybe see back here, I have a water block on the Supermicro AOM module. This one here has 10 gigabit Ethernet, 2 ports, and this is for the IMPI. So that's for the remote control, or for the remote console to control the board from another location. Up here you can see the module which controls the water levels. Everything is connected here, and this runs then to the front, to the other panel, and gives me the output where my levels are. Up here is a little LED, and I have an LED lamp in the reservoir I made myself from acrylic tubing with a row of high-powered LEDs in them. And it's fed from the system to here, and when I activate the switch in the front panel on that reservoir, as I showed you earlier, then the light comes on. Here's a fill plug, and I don't know if you can see it on the bottom here. Here's the valve system. It's a clippered valve, and this is controlled by the pressure gauge controller. Well, that's pretty much it. You can look maybe down here. You can see a 120 millimeter fan from one of the techs. That's the only tech which is installed horizontal. All the others are more in a vertical position. And I have a plate here, normally, which I took off because of filming. And this plate prevents the heat from going into the system and into the radios and being pulled through. So here's a plate in here. So all the tech putting the air out to the side, and which prevents the system from picking up that heat, because those techs get hot. You can see all my cards installed here. I have USB 3 and USB 3.2 over there. These are all for my flight controllers. I have USB 2 in here. 2 fans here. These pull air from the memory modules. That's the monster. I hope you enjoyed this video. If I earned a like from you, you know what to do. Make sure you visit my Discord channel, my Twitter, and my website, which has also a lot of pictures of that system and detailed information about it. See you in the next video. Crash Me Twice, out.